Both manifest themselves, with reference to concrete objects and regardless of their monetary value, in some people's most remarkable psychological mania for accumulation, a trait that often leads people to compare them to hamsters. Such people pile up precious collections of any kind without getting any satisfaction from the objects themselves, frequently without even caring about them. In such cases, value is located not in the subjective reflex of ownership that is normally the reason for acquisition and possession, but in the simple objective fact, unaccompanied by any personal consequences, that merely having these things in their possession is valuable for such people. This phenomenon, which is quite common in a limited and less extreme form, is usually interpreted as egoism since it shares with it the negative side of the common form of egoism, the exclusion of all others from ownership. However, it does differ from it in one respect, which is explored in the following digression. It must always be emphasized that the contrast between egoism and altruism in no way fully embraces the motivations for our actions. In fact, we have an objective interest in whether certain events or things are realized or not, and this is so regardless of the consequences for the human subject. It is important to us that a harmony, an order based on ideas, and a significance, which does not have to fit the usual schemes of ethics or aesthetics, prevail in the world. We feel ourselves obliged to cooperate in this without always asking whether it gives pleasure or will be of advantage to any person, that is, whether it is of interest to oneself or to another. The three motivations come together to some extent in the religious sphere where the position of objective motivation is made quite clear. Compliance with religious commandments can occur out of purely egoistical reasons, either in a crude manner, out of fear or hope, or in a somewhat refined manner, for the sake of a good conscience or the feeling of inner satisfaction. Furthermore, it can be of an altruistic nature. The love of God, the surrender of our heart, may make us obey His commandments, just as we fulfill the wishes of a person we love, because their joy and satisfaction is our greatest concern. Finally, we can be motivated by a feeling for the objective value of a world order in which the will of the highest principle continues uninterrupted in the will of all individual elements. The objective relation between God and ourselves can demand of us this obedience as its adequate expression or its inner necessary consequence, without any consequences for ourselves and without the joy and contentment of God entering this motivation. In many cases, then, the consciousness of purpose stops short of objective reality, and does not borrow its value primarily from its subjective reflexes. I will leave every psychological and epistemological interpretation of this impersonal motivation undecided. Here, it is, in any case, a psychological fact which only enters into a variety of combinations with the sequence of purposes of a personal nature. The collector who shuts away his valuables from everyone else and who does not even enjoy them himself, yet watches most jealously over them, colors his egoism with an admixture of supersubjective valuation. Generally speaking, it is the function of possessions to be enjoyed, and we may contrast this not only with those objects that one enjoys without wanting to own them, like the stars, but also those whose value is independent of all subjective enjoyment, like the beauty, order, and significance of the universe, whose value persists independent of human response. In the case of such possessive people, there exists an intermediate or mixed phenomenon. Possession is certainly necessary, yet it does not extend to its regular subjective consequences, but is experienced as a worthwhile and valuable goal without them. Here it is not the quality of the object that is the genuine bearer of value, rather, however much quality is indispensable and determines the measure of the value, the true motivation is the fact of its being possessed, the form of the relationship in which the subject stands to the object. The real value, at which the teleological sequence comes to an end, lies in this form, which is realizable only in a specific content. It lies in this ownership by the subject which exists as an objective fact. The process of becoming an absolute economic value, the disruption of the teleological sequence before returning to the subject, is in a peculiar way illustrated by a certain significance of landed property which blends with its real economic significance in various ways, though often only as an overtone. Landed property would not have acquired a value except for the fact that it brought in a subjective gain in utility for the owner. Thus, its value is not completely created by such accountable value factors as its yield, the greater security of immobile possessions, the social power connected with it, etc. Over and above all these factors, though bound up with them, there often exists a certain ideal value, and the feeling that it is valuable in itself, that man has a relation of sovereign power over the soil, that he possesses such a close personal relationship to the basis of human existence. Landed property thus possesses and grants a certain dignity which distinguishes it from all other types of possession, even if their resultant utility is equal or greater for the owner. This accounts for the fact that it has often been preserved by sacrifices that are only made in a similar way for an objective ideal. An element of absolute value is therefore hidden in the significance of landed property. It is, or at least it was, connected with the idea that it is valuable to be a landowner even if this value is not expressed in terms of utility. The commitment to landed property may thus possess religious overtones as, for example, at the high point of Greek civilization. At that time, to sell landed property was an offense not only against the children, but also against the ancestors, because it disrupted the continuity of the family. The fact that the supply of land could not easily be increased favored its function as the symbol of family unity which transcended individuals and was sacrosanct. Particularly in the Middle Ages, landed property was ranked as an absolute value to a far greater extent than today. Even though it was sought after, in the first place, because of its yield and the enjoyment of this yield, and thus represented a relative value, it had, over and above its role in the money economy, a specific importance both in and for itself since it was not constantly being turned into money and taxed according to monetary value. One might say that landed property had no equivalent, the sequence of values in which it stood terminated with landed property. Whereas movable objects might be exchanged against one another, immobile property was, cum grano salis, something incomparable. It was value as such, the immovable ground above and beyond which real economic activity was carried on. It was probably not only the economic relativistic interest that motivated the Church to appropriate it, at the beginning of the 14th century. Almost half of English soil, and at the time of Philip II more than half of the Spanish soil, is supposed to have been owned by the clergy, and even today 2/3 of all productive landed estates in the religious state of Tibet belong to the clergy. Just as the Church provided the stable, apparently externally grounded norms of life in the Middle Ages, so it seemed appropriate, in the real as well as the symbolic sense, that it encompassed in its hands that value which was the foundation for all other values.